So we're looking at our last chapter, which is called Taking a Stand with Jesus, as John pointed out. And I'd like to begin with just a short reading of a paragraph or so. I'm on 147. And the Sermon on the Mount is found in chapter 5 of Matthew. It is an entirely Jewish document. Every word in it is either in the Hebrew Bible or rabbinical teaching. So that's the first thing for us to keep in mind. That this is an ancient presentation of a way of living that's different from what comes to us from our caveman ancestry. Because I don't think anybody would deny that this particular gene pool was born with certain birth defects. And that's sometimes called original sin. But teachers came along who showed us a way of living that offsets and reverses those automatic inclinations that are in us all toward aggression. So that's what this is about. So on 147, I start with St. Luke in chapter 6. He gives a briefer version of the Sermon on the Mount. Love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who abuse you. It's not allowing abuse, but praying for those who do abuse you. The Sermon on the Mount is the new paradigm of human relating. It describes unconditional love in practical terms. So we've all heard the expression unconditional love. This shows us how to put it into practice. It spells out exactly how the grandiose narcissistic ego can be transcended. Real faith always leads to love, and love is only possible when our ego-centeredness takes a bow. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus spares us no hideout, no disguise that the ego might don in his razor-sharp delineation of what love means. And he begins with reversing the ancient definitions of the two central concerns of people in ancient times. They had to save face. They had to be sure that people honored them. That was big in their consciousness. And to avoid ever being shamed by what they might do or what their relatives might do. We see this even now in the Middle Eastern world, that if your relative shames you in some way, she or he is the one who's punished. And it's interesting that, so the shame is losing face. And it's interesting that in a book of 5,000 Egyptian dreams, someone in ancient Egypt recorded dreams, 5,000 of them. The most common theme was not, as you might think, sex. That was not the most common theme. The most common theme was the terror of losing face. Yeah, losing ego, basically. And the alternative to losing face was to gain face by having people acknowledge you as a stand-up kind of person. So, for instance, let's take a simple example. Aristotle, this is 3rd century before Christ. He's the tutor of Alexander the Great. And this is what he says in his book called The Rhetoric. To take just revenge on enemies, I'm the bottom of 147. To take just revenge on enemies and refuse to be reconciled. If they should say, I'm sorry for what I did, so let bygones be bygones, let's bury the hatchet. If someone says that to you, if you say yes to it, that would be shameful. You have to say no to that. You have to demand revenge. Doesn't matter whether they ask for forgiveness. So he has that right here. To take just revenge on enemies and refuse to be reconciled. That is praiseworthy, honorable. For to retaliate is just. In other words, how do you bring about justice? You retaliate whether or not somebody even makes up for what they did. They stole $10 and gave you the $10 back, you still have to retaliate. So that was the belief part. Okay. Now, notice the phrase, refuse to be reconciled. And look on the next page. And now I'm quoting Jesus himself. When you're offering your gift at the altar, if you remember your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there and go. First be reconciled, then come and offer your gift. He's reversing Aristotle's view. He's basically reversing the definitions of honor and shame. For instance, it was shameful to be destitute. So, Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor. Blessed are the oppressed. They're on this side now. Whereas to the outside rest of the world, they're on the shame side. So, revenge would be the appropriate reaction to any insult or offense against you. Otherwise, you'll be looked down upon as being weak. And instead, he's proposing that you go ahead and forgive 70 times 7. You can ask for redress, you can ask for amends, but you don't demand it, and you have made your own vow that you will not retaliate, you will look for ways to reconcile. And remember that if you live in a world in which not to retaliate is shameful, and you go ahead and follow this teaching, you're also going to be looked down on by the other people because in their definition, it's more honorable to retaliate. So it's kind of hits you in a double way, if you see what I mean. Okay, and if you have any questions as we go along, just bring them up. So let's just stay with this for a minute. I want to go back to the quote from St. Luke. So it starts with, love your enemies. So you have people who don't like you, you don't like them. They've done things to you that you consider unfair. Instead of saying, let them be, he's saying, actively love them. Then it's do good to those who hate you. Instead of saying, don't hate them back, he's going one further step and says, do good to them. And in San Francisco, I gave a talk at to the staff of a drug rehab program. And when I talked about this because I was somehow on the topic of retaliation. And one of the women said, why would you ever do good to the people who hate you? And that's when I really got it. I thought, oh, you would have to have a special grace to believe this. Like when an ordinary person hears this, do good to those who hate you, they're going to answer the way she did. Why? Why would you do good? Why don't you just let them be, don't hate them, but why would you then do good? There's no motivation. The only motivation to do any of this is that you have been converted to a new way of living. That's the way of Christ. And it's not only of Christ, it's of Gandhi, Martin Luther King, and all the original people who wrote this sermon. Bless those who curse you. So you're doing the opposite. They curse you. Instead of cursing them back, you're not only not cursing them, you're also blessing them. And finally, those who abuse you, mistreat you, you're not only not abusing or mistreating them, you're even praying for them. I consider this so challenging. I mean, here you have these 4 statements, and every one of them has the same point, which is go the extra mile, do something more than just not respond in kind. Because it could have been written this way. If people are your enemies, don't be an enemy to them. If people hate you, don't hate them. If people curse you, don't curse them. If people abuse you, don't abuse them. Even that would have been a big move for most people. But he's proposing something that's off the charts. Wait a minute, not only do I have to not be an enemy, but I even have to love them? How could I possibly do that? The only way I could do that is if something had happened in me, something had turned in me. Turned from where? It turned from the ancient style, the caveman, to classical antiquity style of honor and shame. And somehow it had reversed. And I had a whole new way of living. The Latin word for this kind of turning is conversion. I remember going to Mass on the feast of the conversion of St. Paul. And I remember thinking to myself, gee, I wonder if I'll ever be converted fully. I see so many things in me that aren't yet converted. Like the full message has not taken root in me. So that's my challenge. When they hate me, I'm not only not going to hate them, I'm going to do good, and so forth. Well, what would make this possible? And my friend Dennis Rivers, who's here with us, gave me some way of expressing this, which I'd like to share. And I think it helps us understand the difference between the way we were brought up and the new possibilities that are in us, all described by the Sermon on the Mount. So, your first experience in life is the sense that you belong. First, you belong to the family. I'm in this family. Next door, there's another family. I belong to this family. I have this mother, this father, and so forth. So you begin with belong. When you go to school, I belong to this school, not the one 2 neighborhoods away. When you go to church, I belong to this church, not the other church. You start with belong. The first thing that happens in this connected place of belonging is that they show you how to behave. So in the family, share your toys, don't throw food around, etc. They teach you how to behave. Go to school, they teach you how to behave. Sit still, line up, don't talk in class. Go to church, they tell you how to behave. 10 Commandments. Then they also ask, now we're getting to the religious part of it. In the religious experience, they also ask you to believe. So not only is there a certain way of behaving, and not only are you belonging, But there are also things to be believed without evidence, such as virgin birth, risen Christ, Exodus. But the big challenge may never have come to us. Not only belong, behave, believe, but what about become Christ on earth in your personal daily life? I live now, not I, but Christ lives in me. Words of St. Paul. So this is a bigger challenge than just believing and behaving. Now we have a new possibility, which is, I can become like the one whom I honor as God, that is Christ. I can actually act like Him in the world. How would you act like Him in the world? It's spelled out very clearly in the Sermon on the Mount. Then you would love your enemies, do good to those who hurt you, so forth. So that's the moment. When you made this decision, I would like to become like Him in all things. That's the equivalent of the conversion moment. And some of us never got to that. In Protestantism, they have a very specific ritual. You're baptized as an infant, and then when you're an adult, you're asked to stand up and make your statement that you really do take Christ as your Savior, that you intend to live in accord with His teachings. Our version of that is confirmation, but it happens at such a young age that you don't quite think of it this way. So I moved from belonging to behaving and believing to becoming, and finally, it's to be Christ. Not just become like Him, but be. And that would be the full experience of the conversion. This being, this simply, so there's no longer much of a distinction between myself and Christ. This would be the style of one who, as I say here in the book, has as his first reaction, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you. So in the becoming, you're practicing this, and you're doing all the things that help you get to the point of reversing the old honor and shame paradigm. But when it just happens automatically, that's when you've finally arrived. This happened in St. Francis and St. Therese. They got to the B part. And so can we, because the grace is always being offered to us to get there. Everybody following so far? Anybody have a question or something to add to what I'm saying? Margaret, you want to come up to the microphone? Or do you want to say it and then I'll repeat it? Oh, okay.
How could you possibly love somebody who kills your mother?
Okay. I get the question. She says, how can you possibly love certain people who do the unforgivable? And that's a very deep and important question, which I've thought a lot about. It's when you realize that the forgiving kind of love has nothing to do with excusing. So to forgive is not the same as excuse. But if someone has hurt you in a very deep way, or hurt someone that you love, as an example Margaret gave, you could get to the point of 3 letting goes. You could notice that you have let go of ill will. In other words, I hope he dies, I hope he has a terrible accident. You're letting go of ill will. You're letting go of the ongoing hate and resentment. And you're letting go of the need to retaliate. I no longer feel like I have to get back at him for what he did. I no longer hate him. I just feel sorry for him, whatever. And I no longer have ill will toward him. These three let goes are the equivalent of the healthy forgiveness. So, with this view, there's nothing unforgivable. But even this view is lacking when it comes to the Sermon on the Mount. Because look what he says. Love those who hate you and so forth, or who have hurt you. So here's the new proposal. Not just let go of ill will, but have goodwill toward the one who hurt you so deeply. Not only not hate the one who hurt you, but even love that one. Not only let go of the need to retaliate, but look for some type of reconciliation. So let's take it from the top. We have someone has hurt us, so hurt them back. Hurt back. Now you have everyone from caveman to Aristotle teaching Alexander the Great. Then you have the humanistic view. What you would find in a self-help movement, what you would find in an approach that helps you move through things in a way that doesn't ultimately hurt you. So that's the forgive, let go of the ill will, hate, need to retaliate. And then we come to the third possibility, which is the over-the-top one. That's what Jesus presents to us. Not only let go of the ill will, but have goodwill, and so forth. So this is a really good outline of the overall challenge, and it helps us see that what we're being asked to do when we get to the point of being Christ, now you have a whole new way of operating. Jackie?
Sometimes letting go is the hard part.
Yeah.
You haven't said how we let go. And I can speak from personal experience. I have shared this story with a group before, so I won't tell all its details again. But I was unable to let go. I didn't realize that I hadn't let go. I was totally unable to let go until, out of God's mercy, He sent me a dream in which I let go in the dream, and it stayed that way. But I could not do it on my own.
Glad you brought that up, because I also believe the letting go is a grace. In the self-help movement, it's through a series of practices. In Buddhism, it's the practice of loving kindness. That's how you let go. You keep saying over and over again, may he be happy, may he find the enlightened way. May he be free of all the hate and aggression that's in him. You keep repeating that over and over again. That helps you let go. And I'm proposing that it takes more than that. It also takes a special grace. And Jackie has pointed out that sometimes the grace comes in a dream. Yeah.
Isn't the concept of turning the other cheek, doesn't it go farther than this?
Yes. Turn the other cheek would be, and that also is, shall we say, over-the-top style. So in that view, which I don't have on our 3-part list here, you would even welcome the hurts. I consider that a very special calling. So I don't quite relate to it, and nowadays with all our awareness of not putting up with abuse, we don't really go there. But yes, that would be another calling. Like the holy martyrs were certainly in that category. Hi, Christina.
Hi, Dave. I was reflecting on this idea of grace. And maybe I don't understand it, but I see grace as something that comes to us that we have no control over it.
Right.
So, forgiving is a daily reality for us. And the idea that we depend on something that is only given to us beyond our control to become something that is very important and big is a little discouraging. So, however, Jackie gave me an idea there. Wouldn't it make more sense for something as important as learning to forgive, that God would build in our humanity a way to help us progress, rather than something that we just depend on whenever. So I thought Jackie kind of showed the way. Maybe psychology shows the way that forgiving is not something that we can necessarily always do consciously, that there are deeply hidden pains that the dreams can heal. The subconscious, maybe there's better than talk therapy, in other words. And if anything, maybe God leads us to the way of new ways of looking, like the new energy therapies, like EMDR that helps the vets get over PTSD. Talk of forgiving. PTSD is just absolutely stunting. So anyway, I was just thinking maybe we need to look for a better way, and that God has already granted the grace of this way. And Jackie showed that the dreams are one way that our human nature wants us to move on, and that the Spirit will talk to us. Anyway, that's what I was saying. The idea of grace and depending on it, even though it sounds wonderful, it's not very encouraging for something we need daily,
Okay, thank you. Maybe it would help to look at it this way, because you asked a good question, which is there something else we can turn to in ourselves? And you're right. We can turn for messages to our unconscious. They come to us in dreams, for instance. But also consciously, and this is the part that's the built-in grace, is in every person there is a full and intact capacity to love. I'll never forget on the anniversary of the Shoah, I guess it was the closing of one of the camps like Auschwitz. And on 60 Minutes, they had a little section on this. And they had a famous and very wise rabbi. Mike Wallace was interviewing him. And this is the question he asked. He said, "You say you're the chosen people, but yet you were so terribly treated during World War II by the Nazis and all the silent people around them who participated in your extermination. In what sense do you use that phrase, chosen people?" And I remember thinking, oh my Lord, I wouldn't be able to answer this question. But this is what he said without the slightest blinking of an eye, and I thought it was so beautiful and so perfect. He said, "We're chosen in the sense that even though there have been all these pogroms and exterminations throughout history, we never lost our capacity to love. That's how we're chosen." He said, it isn't that you take it literally, that somebody's going to intervene and make everything come out all right. He even said, I don't even think the parting of the Red Sea actually happened. What happened was oppressed people were able to go on loving. So I expanded that in my own mind, and I said, oh, okay, so that actually refers to all humans. We've all been hurt in so many ways, from the beginning until now of our lifetime. But look, something has survived. That's the capacity to love, always available, and that's what I call our interior grace. And then our interior voice of God is unconscious, our unconscious. And this unconscious shows itself in two basic ways, in dreams and in synchronicity. Unusual coincidences in which things come together for you. You know you didn't cause it, but there it is, and it really helps you. So these would be considered graces also. In that sense, grace is always available. But the challenge of living in accord with statements about living in accord with the sermon that says love your enemies and so forth, that will take more than just grace. That will take practice also. And on page 150, I give some recommendations of these practices. For instance, you can seek reconciliation and forgiveness from others. You can do what Kate brought up and what they do in the AA program, make amends and ask for amends. You can choose nonviolence in your disputes. You can live by example, teach by example, not by coercion. You can be generous. You can return good for evil. You can respect love and wisdom over position and wealth. You can let go of anxiety about how things will turn out because you have a trust that an absolute loyalty and honoring of what occurs is the true path to freedom from fear. And finally, you can let go of judgment and competitiveness, and instead of judging, you can have compassion. Instead of competing, you have cooperation. So we can do things like this. That full conversion takes grace, but we can do some things. Examples in what I just read out. Hi.
Hi. So earlier you were talking about the process of becoming Christ-like and being.
Yeah.
Do you think that the answer to the question of how do we forgive a huge hurt is if we are Christ, we will be forgiving? So the farther down that progression we get, the more likely we are to be able to have the grace to forgive.
Yes. Yes, that's a good way to put it. The further down you are, if all you have is that you belong to the church and you behave in the way the church recommends in most areas, and you believe in what the church teaches for the most part, and that you have understood that becoming more and more like Christ in the world is a good idea and you are trying it, the further down the list you get, especially when you get to what you just brought up, where you just automatically are like Christ and are Christ in the world, then it's easier and easier to forgive. If you only have the belonging, it's going to be hard to forgive. If you only have the belong and behave, that'll be hard, etc. Everybody get the basic concept? Okay. Dennis? Oh, this is Dennis, and this is his idea. So here he is.
Well, it seems to me there's a hidden component in that question of how will I forgive the seemingly unforgivable? And that is, we're asking that question, how will I forgive the seemingly unforgivable while otherwise remaining pretty much the same person I've always been? And that is probably the great challenges of forgiveness wind up being challenges to sort of reorganize oneself. Somewhat the way you shake a kaleidoscope. When you shake a kaleidoscope, all the same beads are there, but they fall into a new pattern. So it does seem like these giant challenges to forgive represent challenges for us to become the kind of next person on our pilgrimage through life. Because our pilgrimage through life is kind of like, this has one transformation after another. The other thing I wanted to comment on was that the Dalai Lama, when he came here to Santa Barbara, made a wonderful suggestion about this, and it has stuck in my mind ever since. He said, when someone injures you, think of a circumstance in which you yourself could be so confused that you would do exactly that same thing, or you would make exactly that same mistake. And then you won't carry the person around inside of you as a demon anymore. They're just one more confused human being, because we've all been confused. We've all been angry to the point where we've done things that we later regretted. So that sets the stage for us to say, oh yes, that person over there is one more confused, suffering human being who does things that cause pain. And on that basis, we can have compassion. Perhaps maybe when we think about using the word love, we attach all sorts of positive emotions to it. There could be different versions of love. There could be gentle, compassionate acceptance. Yes, I accept that person as a suffering human being who makes all sorts of mistakes. And may they find their way to a more humane way of being in the world, which is the same thing I wish for myself.
Okay, thank you, Dennis. That's very helpful. So, we're really going deeply into this topic, and I'm so glad we're doing this. And all the things that people have shared have helped deepen what I'm bringing up. I mean, I'm learning a lot from all that you're saying. But I just want to say one last thing on the be Christ. You might look at it this way, that each of us gives Christ the opportunity of a lifetime, literally, this lifetime of David and this lifetime of Jenny are unique ways that Christ lives his life again. He didn't just live in Israel from the year 0 to 30. The meaning of resurrection is he is still living, and every single human is giving him that opportunity. So when you ask for the grace to be Christ in the world, what you're really asking for is what's already true. It's just that now you want to show it. This has already happened. It happened at your birth. So all that's left is, then how do I act that way? And he showed us how. Matthew 5. Sermon on the Mount. Beatitudes. Full list of exactly what it would take. Okay. Just a reminder, someone during the break pointed out that when we think of grace, instead of thinking of it as a kind of a dollop of something that's added to your day, think of it more as always happening, and every once in a while you notice it and enter it. And what is the it? It's this free gift that is both, that comes through interiorly in your own capacity to make the loving choice, and the free gift that comes in synchronicity and in dreams to alert you to what the important message is for you. So, let's continue with, now I'm on page 150. No, wait a minute. Now I'm on page 154. And I just wanted to mention some specific virtues that we see in the life of Jesus. And these would be the ones that are available to everyone. He seemed to have a trust in a power beyond himself. This power has a fatherly, motherly, parental feeling, as well as the feeling of a companion. So this is the one mentioned in the 23rd Psalm. I fear no evil, for thou art with me. Seems like he had that trust. Also, a commitment to nonviolence and non-retaliation, which ultimately means that you never give up on others, as God never gives up on us. And the story of the prodigal son is an example of that. Also, in Matthew 25, he gives the very specific actions that are called the works of mercy. Feed the hungry, clothe the naked, shelter the shelterless, visit the sick and imprisoned. In other words, act in the world. When we act in the world this way, we are being Christ in the world. You're reversing the worldly values so that such values as ego status, financial gain, political prestige, control of others, they're no longer as important as activating the capacity to love. So he's presenting a new set of values. Also, he proposes abolishing rank, distinctions that separate. No biases against those who are different from us based on gender, race, color, belief, sexual orientation. If we still retain prejudices, and remember those prejudices might have been right here in the original experience of belonging. Part of the belonging was you have to hate the same ones we hate. That could have been in there in your childhood or even school or church. But when you retain these prejudices that gave you the sense of belonging, you're courageously saying, I no longer belong to something that is ultimately hurtful of others. I have a new sense of belonging. I'm part of the vast planetary community of those who have turned from aggression toward nonviolence, and who are showing that by not being aggressive toward people who are different. He also was able to speak truth to power. He certainly made an unconditional commitment to a life of love and forgiveness. And he always trusted that the grace to do all this is abundant and available. Okay. So let's take a look on 157. I just wanted to look at that second paragraph. Our spirituality is progressing when our first reaction to others is not from our ego, mind, but from the heart of Christ, our true nature, who we really are. And thus the ego's automatic reaction of conditional love becomes unconditional. Narrow ego biases suddenly open up and become, you're so expanded and so generous and so wise in the way you are in the world that the biases have faded away. Retaliation has vanished into reconciliation. Then your first impulse, when you have gotten to this B part of the whole picture, is not to get back at, but to get back with those who have hurt you. And through practice, that new set of Christ responses becomes habitual. That habit is called sanctity. What is a saint? One who has built the habit of acting in accord with the Sermon on the Mount. Our larger, higher, deeper identity has triumphed over the limiting but sheltering habits of the ego. Everybody following? Last night I was turning the TV channels and they were showing Godfather. And every time I see it, I remember my own childhood, and it's just so perfect. It's such a perfect description of the attitudes we were brought up with, having to do with get back at people, retaliate, and I'm continually aware that it's a deep atheism. Catholicism was a mere veneer over our atheistic commitments. It took me many years to see that. And I think it's going to take more than a lifetime to undo. But I'll do the best I can. Okay, so let's take a look on 160. Because now I want to go into one other dimension of this. Joseph Martos has a wonderful book called Doors to the Sacred. It's a book about the 7 sacraments. He gives you the history of each one, and he talks about what they actually mean. And this is a quote from that book. As long as the gospel and the sacraments are not seen as referring to salvation in this life and transformation of the world into God's kingdom, the oppressed people of the earth will never fully realize the freedom of God's sons and daughters for which Jesus died and for which the church was founded. For sacraments concretely symbolize what they abstractly stand for only when, in the course of their performance, they make what they represent experientially and personally present in sacred time and space. So I'm going to go back and restate it more simply. As long as you're using the church and the sacraments for your own personal salvation, you miss the point of the church itself, which is to bring about on earth a kingdom of justice, peace, and love. And see the sacraments as helpful means to bring that about. But when these sacraments are just done in a kind of functionary way, or you just participate in them by habit, then they don't really take effect. They take effect when something is experienced in you and you feel as if, oh yes, I want to be Christ in the world. I want to bring about His kingdom of justice, peace, and love. We say that in the Lord's Prayer, Thy kingdom come. That's what's meant by thy kingdom come. I want a world of justice instead of injustice and oppression and bias. I want a world of peace instead of war and violence. I want a world of love instead of hate. And the sacraments are skillful means, assisting forces that help us get there. They're such a beautiful gift. But if they're only thought of as an obligation or a habit, then they don't get to do what they can do. And I wanted to go to this quotation from Gandhi in the next paragraph. I do not believe that the spiritual law works on a field of its own. On the contrary, it expresses itself only through the ordinary activities of life. It thus affects the economic, social, and political fields. Or another way of putting that is, it isn't as if this spiritual power just happens on its own. We're the ones who have to bring it about. I don't know if any of you remember the famous story from World War II. This actually happened. The American soldiers came into a German town toward the end of the war. And this town had been bombed and mostly destroyed. In the center of the town was a statue of Christ. And he was standing with his arms facing the devotees, but the hands were no longer there. They had been destroyed by the explosives. So a soldier wrote on a piece of paper, which he placed at the foot of the statue, "I have no hands but yours." And when the war was over, the townspeople made a plaque in which they engraved that quotation, which is still there. They did not replace the hands. It's a statue with no hands, and he will have no hands except yours. Kind of reminds me of the poem by Robert Browning, and the name of the person who invented the Stradivarius violin is Antonio Stradivarius. So this is the poem. How could God make a Stradivarius without Antonio? Get the idea? Can't be done. He can't make a Stradivarius without Antonio. So there can't be a world of justice, peace, and love, no matter how much God wants His kingdom to come, unless we're the ones who would do it. So all of this is on our overall topic of how there's something challenging in this whole story of our connection to Christ and to our religion. And this challenge is stated simply in what we began with, which is somehow to go beyond non-harming those who have harmed us, or even anyone, to go beyond the non-harming. So do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's the non-harming. And look, a new proposal. Instead of being satisfied with this, which doesn't place enough of a challenge onto this kind of body-mind. This kind of body-mind is capable of much more than just non-harming. It's capable of showing an unconditional and universal love. And it would only be shown, as we were just pointing out, in all the little ways that come up in the course of the day. Buddhism has a wonderful practice called loving kindness, in which you practice this on a daily basis, and there's a meditation that goes with it. You simply bring to mind first yourself, and you say, "May I be happy," and then you expand. So let's take a quick look at it with concentric circles. So here you are in the middle, and you, like every single person, lives in a world in which around you are people that you love or love you. There are also people around you that you have difficulties with. Some of these people you dislike, and they dislike you. There are also people around you who are kind of neutral, like the mailman, the teller at the bank. And finally, there are all the other people, all beings, whom you will never meet. So this practice of loving kindness is stated this way: may I be happy, may those I love be happy, may those I have difficulty with be happy, may those to whom I am neutral be happy, may all beings be happy. May I find enlightenment, may those I love find enlightenment, and so forth. So you have expanded the reach of the love instead of keeping it just with those you love. In fact, last night when I was turning the channels, I watched the scene in which the Godfather was having a discussion with one of the other dons, one of the other heads of families, and they were on the topic of, should we get into the drug business? Marlon Brando said, "No, I'm not going to go there." And his son was sitting next to him, and he suddenly spoke up and said something to the other man. Marlon Brando quieted him down, said, "Don't say anything." After the meeting, this was all very familiar from my own childhood. After the meeting, he calls the son over. "Don't you ever say something to people who are not in our family about our business." I remember that. Keep it within the family. Don't let other people in. We don't trust them. Price of belonging. Keep it only here with the family members. So that would be the equivalent of you're saying your rosary or prayers, and you're praying for your children and grandchildren. You only went this far to pray for the ones close to you. The bigness of our faith, the big-heartedness of our faith would be, I will never stop there again. I will always go on. I will include all the people who have hurt me all through my life. I will include the neutral people, and finally I will include everyone. And look, I can even start with myself. Even that will be shocking, the way we were brought up. Always put others first. But Buddha gave us permission to put ourselves first in this practice. And I think this will be one of the ways, as I mentioned before, to start on the process of living in accord with this Sermon on the Mount. Any questions about this part? Okay, so let's just finally take a look at our epilogue. And now we're over on page 1, begins on page 165. And I'm going to the last part of it, which is page 168. Finally, the human divine vocation is visible as a metaphor of a perennial religious practice, which is pilgrimage. So I was thinking about this because now there's more interest in the Camino, the medieval pathway to St. James Compostela in Spain. People walk along this path. So I think you're supposed to begin in Paris and walk all the way to it, but you can begin anywhere. And I'm taking it as a metaphor. We were born as pilgrims, not as tourists. We weren't brought here to look around. We were brought here to be pilgrims on our way to a shrine. What is this shrine? It's the entire material world. We know our life is a pilgrimage, a journey, because we can see farther than we can reach. We wouldn't have had eyes like that. For instance, now I can see a stained glass window all the way at the end of this building, but I can't reach it with my arm. If I'm that kind of being who can see farther than I can reach and have the legs to walk to it, it must be that pilgrimage is in me. Whether to Delphi, that's the ancient shrine of Apollo in Greece, whether to Delphi or to Lourdes, shrine of the Virgin Mary in France, human beings travel to shrines for healings of body and renewal of spirit. And a shrine seems to represent dualism. I'm here and the shrine is there. I'm here looking at Mary or Apollo. Actually, it's a crossroads of divinity and humanity. Our attention is on a power that is certainly beyond us, but it's also in us. A shrine is a window, and we're looking at the image in the shrine, and we're seeing the divine. The divine is that which is bigger than we ordinarily see or imagine. But a shrine is also a mirror. Now you're looking at a reflection of who you really are, what your calling is, what you can be. You're looking at the divine potential in you for wholeness. What is wholeness? I have gone beyond just the caveman version of being human. I have gone all the way to the Christ, St. Francis, Gandhi, Martin Luther King version. That's wholeness. And graces come to match and expand our unknown and unacknowledged capacities. That's what's meant by your faith has made you whole. Your faith in grace. The shrine shows the path and the paradise promising a future that has already happened and that wants to happen again. And it happens when we come in with a cosmic consciousness rather than just individual or limited consciousness that just goes to the first concentric circle. And I end with a quote from a wonderful Episcopal mystic, 17th century Thomas Traherne. He's also a poet. The all, namely the divine life, the all is wholly within us. I'm on page 168. The all is wholly within us, and even then, seems wholly around us, without us. It's outside and inside at the same time. It is an object infinitely great and ravishing. Ravishing, it's attracting us. As full of treasures, as full of room, as full of joy as of capacity. So it offers us a treasure, and it has plenty of room for us to enter this treasury, and it offers joy and the capacity for joy. It not only offers you the joy, it offers you capacity for this kind of joy. What kind of joy is it? It's the joy of the all, what combines our own little life story, as Shakespeare says, this little life surrounded by a sleep. You sleep before you were born, sleep after you die. This little life surrounded by a sleep is not the only picture of us. When we go to the shrine, we see a fuller picture of what we're like. So when you go to Delphi, where people brought their questions, their concerns, their longings, and the God responded from deep in the earth through a priestess. In other words, it's from the earth through the feminine. The wisdom comes from earth through the feminine to you, and then it's up to you to follow it. You could think of it as, I went there and I received a response to my question, a fulfillment of my longing. You could see it that way. Or in true bigness, you could see it as, that is me speaking. I went to Delphi to find my own voice. I'm the one who came from deep in the earth to respond to my longings. That was me. It wasn't the god Apollo speaking through his priestess. I am that god and the priestess. And when you go to Lourdes, same thing. I am making contact with this mother, healer, wisdom, archetype of the feminine, pictured in the statue, represented by the statue, but not limited to that. I'm looking at a mirror of the capacity inside me. That's where all these religious images come from. Somebody noticed what was in us and drew a picture of it. Then they put a halo around it and said, oh, it's a god, it's a saint. But all along, it was a picture of ourselves. What a wonderful realization about us. And it makes us aware of our limitlessness. Okay, so I think that kind of winds up what we're talking about. But I do want to end with this prayer that I have on page 172. And I'll just say a word about it before I start. The Eucharist is, of course, shown in... Eucharist is meant to be a verb. It's meant to be about how we go out into the world and create a world of justice, peace, and love. And it looks like a round piece of unleavened bread, since the Last Supper was a Seder and they were eating unleavened bread. And the host becomes our food at Mass. Or sometimes the host is pictured in what's called a monstrance. It's kind of a golden holder, and the host is in the middle, And it usually has sunburst of gold around it. So I'm sure most of you are probably familiar with that image. But once I was looking at the host in the monstrance, and I had a sudden realization, which I'd like to share. I thought to myself, okay, we were taught that this is the body and blood of Christ. I get that. But when I looked more carefully, I said to myself, but it's also a piece of bread. Bread is a grain from the earth. So it's a material thing. It's something earthy. Could it also be that this host symbolizes the entire cosmos? Since it is matter, since it is something material that you can touch and taste and eat, it's something from our planet, and our planet exists in the whole universe. What if I were to think of this not only as about the body and blood of Christ, but to become aware that the entire cosmos is adorable. So instead of just adoring this host because it's the body and blood of God Himself, instead of stopping there, what if I were to say, oh, then it must be that the whole material world of Mother Earth is also worthy of adoration. That must have come to me from all the studying of Teilhard de Chardin. But I just felt so clear and felt like I had really come to a certain wisdom when I had this realization. So it led me to write this prayer, which is on page 172. Thank you, God, for showing us in the Eucharist who we really are. A unity of body and spirit, human and divine, without division, without exclusion of anyone or anything, for all is sacred. When you look at us, Father, you see us in the loving heart of your Son, who makes us all one. Not only those of us here at this table, but all humanity around the table of the universe. We have partaken of the body of the risen Christ because we are His body, and so is the whole world. Now send us forth to continue your work of evolving the church and the world. We thank you for creating the universe and each of us through Christ, the pioneer of our journey, and in the Holy Spirit, the gift of your love, one God, forever and ever. Amen.